Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jeff Petts. I'm Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Westminster, and it's my great privilege to introduce our speaker this evening in what is the final Westminster talks of this year. Particular welcome to those of you that are joining us from outside the university. You really are most welcome. The format is that we enjoy the talk, we have a mischievous Q&A, but not too long, and then we adjourn to the foyer for a reception where the conversations become more intense, and I'm sure Michael will be prepared to stay and engage you in discussion throughout the evening. Professor Michael Newman joined us this year as Professor of Sustainable Urbanism in the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. He held a chair at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, where he served as Director of Infrastructure Research, Chair of the Built Environment Node of the Australian Climate Change Adaptation Research Network, snappy title, and Associate Director of the City Futures Research Centre. But by background, he's a chemical engineer by first degree. He's also an exhibiting photographer, a published poet. He served as an officer in the US Navy, and most impressively from my perspective, he cycled across the USA. Michael is known for his leadership in pioneering concepts and practices in planning and design. While working for the New Jersey Office of State Planning in the 1980s, he helped develop the New Jersey State Plan, cited in the Journal of the American Planning Association as one of 3 landmark American plans of the 20th century. Professor Newman is the author of numerous articles, reports, and plans, including Engendering Cities, The Futures of the City Region, The Imaginative Institution, Building California's Future, and Coordinating Growth and Environmental Management through Consensus Building. He has won Best Article Awards in Town Planning Review, twice, European Planning Studies, and the Journal of the American Planning Association. His professional and scholarly work has won numerous awards ranging from the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Science Foundation to the Planning Institute of Australia, the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the Spanish and Catalan governments, among many others. This evening, Professor Newman delivers his lecture on the power of London's hidden flows. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Newman.
Thank you. That name of that Australian organization wasn't chosen by me, and that was only half of it. So, well, thank you, Vice Chancellor Petts, for inviting me to deliver this lecture, and to Professors Petts and Durney for bringing me to Westminster, and to our distinguished audience tonight, thank you all for coming. You will ask hard questions during our discussion afterwards, so will I. It's a pleasure to be working in London. It's a booming global capital, progressive and dynamic, with progressive and dynamic leadership. It has a cosmopolitan culture, of course, backed by storied history, and a set of a whole litany of difficulties and uncertainties today. And it's a place where, for example, climate change and social equity are understood and acted upon for what they are, clear and present dangers. And a city with a history of strong infrastructure networks undergirding its basis of long being at the center of global flows, whose very infrastructure gave rise to those flows. All these add up to challenges and opportunities to which our vibrant global city takes its positive spirit to face and to solve. And so tonight I stress the centrality of infrastructure to deal with each and every one. Cities are humankind's crowning achievements. Cities are the largest and most complex artifacts created by humans. Their size and complexity bears on their very possibility of sustainability. More on this later. Quote, cities are the most visible signature of the Anthropocene, a new era in the coevolution of life and the planet. This from her daring new book, Cities That Think Like Planets. Marina Alberti underscores a new condition of our age and the evolution of life on our planet. And if Sir David Attenborough has another series left in him to crown his quest to inform and inspire, he would do well to call it the Gray Planet. Professor Alberti goes on to say that urban ecology faces a significant challenge to position itself in the context of planetary change and to understand the role that cities play in the evolution of the Earth now. We can take that further and say that as cities are ecosystems, infrastructures are their roots. Infrastructures are the lifeblood and the circulatory systems of cities. And without infrastructure, cities couldn't even exist. We see report upon report extolling the virtues while simultaneously decrying the condition and inadequacies of our infrastructure. The Eddington and Armit reports, the ICE and the RTPI, the London Infrastructure Plan 2050, government agencies, foundations, think tanks, and others have chimed in. And so in this avalanche, London and the United Kingdom are far from alone. In the USA, the American Society of Civil Engineers just released its quadrennial State of America's Infrastructure report card. It's most alarming yet. The overall state of all infrastructure is D+, just above failing. The cost to bring to current standards over the next 8 years alone is $4.5 trillion. This does not account for new growth, new technologies, or new standards such as sustainability. We have the knowledge and the capacity to deal with these issues, and to cite Sir John Armit, Deputy Chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, quote, "A second engineering adage comes to mind. Give me a problem and I'll give you a solution. We are good at engineering solutions, but we don't always fully examine the root causes of the problems," end quote. Not to worry, Sir John. Let me offer an urban planning adage. Give me a problem and we'll give you analysis of the root causes. Sounds like planners and engineers should work together more often. Moreover, urban designers and planners see the long term and the big picture, examine impacts, design future scenarios and assessment tools while considering multiple interests at multiple contexts and multiple scales. So let's apply a bit of context to the scale and pace of urbanization today by looking at the population, economy, and energy increases since the year 1500. In the year 1500, there were about 500 million Homo sapiens inhabiting the planet. Today, there are over 7 billion, a 14-fold increase. The total value of goods and services produced then was estimated at $250 billion in today's dollars. Nowadays, the value of a year of human production is over $80 trillion, a 320-fold jump. In 1500, humanity consumed about 13 trillion calories of energy per day. Today, we consume 1,500 trillion calories per day, a 115-fold rise. And according to my own calculations based on UN, International Energy Agency, CIA, and World Bank data, since 1960, while human population has a bit more than doubled, economic output has octupled, and resource consumption has gone up even more, and estimates on resource depletion vary. Thus, we are getting less efficient and less sustainable as we move to cities, not more so, contrary to popular belief and professional dogma. Cities are voracious. Prospects for the future are worse. A 2016 UN Environment Program report projects world resource consumption will triple by 2050, even as world population will only rise 28%. Where will this end if nearly 50 years ago we already exceeded the planet's natural capacity to support our presence? 20 years ago, a number of preeminent ecologists and biologists published a linked series of articles in the journal Science titled Human-Dominated Ecosystems. They provided evidence that every habitat, including Antarctica, is dominated by human activities. And 10 years before that, another biologist coined the term the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is our present epoch that gives a name to human modifications to the biosphere. And per Benjamin Kunkel, it is the current situation, quote, in which humanity, accidentally or deliberately, engineers the planet's condition, end quote. And James Lovelock's prescient Gaia theory is increasingly supported by the evidence. More and more scientists predict global collapse this century due to complete marine algae die-off when the CO2 levels in the atmosphere reach 500 parts per million, which at current rates will occur in the year 2050. Others suggest that civilization itself will likely be extinct in a few centuries, if not sooner. So here we have atmospheric carbon dioxide along those years, measured in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And here we have atmospheric carbon dioxide over the last 400,000 years. We know from numerous studies that causes and consequences are not distributed evenly. For example, Andreas Malm, in his book Fossil Capital, highlights that, quote, in the early 21st century, the poorest 25% of the population produced 7% of carbon in the emissions, while the richest 7% produced 50% of the emissions. So capital is more implicated in carbon. And Manuel Castells claimed more than 30 years ago that the flows of power had been overtaken by the power of flows, digital flows of capital and information, especially program ones, that overwhelm the long-standing power structures and render them far less than effective than before. This has fueled the ungovernability crisis. And if infrastructure sowed and accelerated the seeds of our production and our misfortune, can we invert the equation and find in flows and their conduits, infrastructure, a salvation that is cleaner, greener, and more equitable? So against this backdrop, let me query the local scene. While London and the government have made critical investments in infrastructure in recent years, are they enough? Have they been in the right places and for the best purposes? Here we can refer to the National Infrastructure Plan and the London Infrastructure Plan, perspicacious endeavors both. Do they fully address these questions and properly integrate the spatial aspects of infrastructure in a sustainable, cradle-to-cradle and equitable manner? These are the issues that I'll address tonight. Let me employ my work with the state of California's infrastructure strategy and the New Jersey State Plan, whose principles for large-scale infrastructure planning may be instructive. The Public Policy Institute of California, known as the Brookings Institution of the West Coast, commissioned me to conduct an infrastructure assessment in the state. We studied all infrastructure at all state agencies and found some eye-openers. We see that California spent less per student in the university that produced the most Nobel Prizes than per prisoner in the prisons that produced the most vehicle number plates. It's in the bottom left of the... Another finding was how backwards the process to finance infrastructure was, as revealed by this chart. So, for example, on the right-hand side, under actual, it's the political cycle that determines the finance and the revenues available, which determines the budget, the costing, the planning, the designing. Whereas it doesn't really deal with the actual needs out there and go through what you can consider a rational life cycle-based approach. As one result of our work, the state adopted a new law mandating 5-year strategic infrastructure plans at the state level. That changed planning and budgeting, with financing slower to follow. In New Jersey, a key component of their state plan was a 20-year infrastructure needs assessment for a population of 8 million for all public infrastructure at all levels of government. This 200-page assessment was pioneering for being the first known use of life cycle analysis and life cycle costing for entire infrastructure systems. The state plan itself is a strategic spatial plan to guide infrastructure, and significantly, like the UK's National Infrastructure Commission, the State Planning Commission was housed in the Department of Treasury, a political decision that took into account the inescapable link between politics and finance, capital and facilities. Moreover, Treasury is the management arm of government, coordinating policies and budgets, both capital and operational. Thus, the state plan linked politics, planning, policy, management, and budget, all based on infrastructure investments supported by an infrastructure needs assessment. So a word about infrastructure needs assessment. The first one I analyzed over 30 years ago carried the ominous title, America in Ruins, exclamation mark. All the ones I've examined since can be captured in 3 terms. First, dire warnings of safety, adequacy, capacity. Second, an off-putting number of zeros after the pound or dollar sign. And finally, need always far outstrips supply as well as funding. So without commenting on the current National Needs Assessment for Infrastructure just released by the Institution of Civil Engineers, this persistent parade suggests solutions to the problems they bring to light have not really been forthcoming. There continue to be major funding shortfalls because we're all stuck in business as usual in terms of systems design, network integration, and financing. So before I take up the funding question, a quote from the letter to Lord Adonis, chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, regarding the strategic value of infrastructure. In it, the Chancellor exhorts the Commission to, quote, maximize the potential of the Cambridge-Milton-Keynes-Oxford corridor as a single knowledge-intensive cluster that competes on a global stage. It recognized that the strategic nature of infrastructure in developing such a corridor. It would be remiss, though, if it were not to consider the other 2 sides of the London-Cambridge-Oxford triangle. That triangle is already well connected and working well on the 2 sides that connect London to Oxford and London to Cambridge. Together, this triangle's population approaches 14 million, of which 13 million live in the Greater London area, according to Eurostat. We can call this the Loxbridge Triangle. The Texas urban triangle of Dallas-Fort Worth to the north, Houston, and San Antonio is like the London-Oxford-Cambridge triangle as each is the motor of its polity's economy. The Texas triangle contains some 20 million people, generating about 80% of the state's economic output. It's a single functioning urban region that our report put on the map. The term has entered the lexicon by conferring a distinct identity. It also had a role in America's second high-speed rail project, and Westminster architecture professor Peter Sherritt's firm is involved in that project, as well as California's HSR. These next 2 slides show the composite suitability analysis for future development that synthesizes over 80 factors across 58,000 square miles. So these are just the categories of the factors that we looked at. And this, I don't know if the animation will come through, but this was a composite suitability over that triangle that our analysis revealed that showed the most appropriate places for growth. So green is the highest suitability, red is the lowest suitability. And we did it with a 20-year projection that each year had an animated, but that this slide doesn't show. And so our follow-on research funded by the Texas and the U.S. Departments of Transportation developed a web-based spatial decision support system to analyze the most suitable and sustainable route for high-speed rail. We can see how thinking and acting as in a functional region sense that the London-anchored Loxbridge Triangle will further synergize with the designated strategic corridors of London, Stansted, Cambridge, Peterborough, as well as the Thames Gateway and the proposed Cambridge to Oxford corridor. So opportunity knocks. And another project that we did in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in Louisiana, an interdisciplinary team of 20 graduate students assessed New Orleans and coastal Louisiana to create a plan for its recovery. This slide shows projected coastal wetland losses to 2050, keeping in mind the tens of thousands of square miles that the loss to date. And we also calculated that the distance between New Orleans and the Gulf Coast was exactly the distance over which the storm surge would have been attenuated had the wetlands and barrier islands remained intact in coastal Louisiana. In other words, intact green infrastructure would have prevented flooding, sparing 3,000 lives and hundreds of billions of dollars in damage. And so one of the analyses we did is the first of its type to our knowledge. We looked at economic vulnerability over southern Louisiana, So New Orleans is there. And we looked at the physical risk, the social vulnerability, and multi-factor ecological suitability, or you could also say vulnerability. And we did a composite map of the best places for growth in the future in southern Louisiana. The analysis and plan demonstrated the vital importance of ecological infrastructure, green infrastructure, sometimes referred to as that, green infrastructure, although the two terms aren't exactly interchangeable. We found that the root causes of the problems were regional and ecological, not technical and local, per the architects and the engineers. This was due to our interdisciplinary approach and our ecological outlook. The smart use of nature as green infrastructure is a cheaper, more sustainable way to manage ecosystems and urban development simultaneously. We tend to think of infrastructure as the hard stuff, the gray matter, as if that were all that mattered. This is due to, but yet is that smart? How much urban infrastructure is concrete and asphalt, the dumbest materials around? In contrast, take a quintessential terrestrial ecosystem, a forest. We know how alive and diverse, productive, beautiful, and complex they are at eye level. Let's go underground to examine its infrastructure. Mycorrhizal, fungal, and roots networks in this forest soil comprise nature's infrastructure. They underpin and give life to the forest. Underground mycorrhizal networks channel the symbiotic relationships between the fungal networks and the roots of all the vascular plants, including trees. In fact, the two largest known ecosystems, organisms on the planet are largely underground. Both are clonal colonies with massive roots. A honey fungus in Oregon covers 3.7 square miles, and a quaking aspen colony in Utah has a root system for 47,000 trees. Estimates put it at 80,000 years of age, making it the oldest known organism, all thanks to roots, nature's infrastructure. Trees communicate with each other and provide life support to each other through these networks as if they were a close-knit family. Turns out the film Avatar wasn't so far-fetched. Fungi do this too. In fact, one of our doctoral students here just finished her thesis on do fungus communicate with each other. These networks form the basis of forest ecosystems and have been around for hundreds of millions of years. What about urban ecosystems? Are urban infrastructures that smart? Can they talk to and support each other, self-regulate, self-regenerate, create resilience? We need to move far away from the function and efficiency criteria that have dominated infrastructure in cities for centuries. To be fair, forests have had a several 100-million-year evolutionary head start on cities. Hopefully we'll have time to catch up. The basis of a circular economy, better still, circular society, is circular infrastructure abetted by circular thinking. Circular infrastructure networks are open, interconnected, and integrated, where the outputs of one form the inputs to others. And this is a tall order given the way infrastructures have been designed and built till now, generally speaking. We can go further and highlight the role of small-scale infrastructures that complement yet are overlooked by sexy big-ticket items. We must apply last-mile thinking to all infrastructures and interconnect them just like capillaries and venules are connected to arteries and veins. Last mile, last drop, last bit or byte, last joule, and so on. When infrastructures are designed and built so that smaller-scale networks are incrementally interwoven into larger ones, and so that modular components are incrementally embedded into larger scales, we add flexibility, we add resilience, and we add adaptability. These microsystems are less costly and can be deployed on buildings and open spaces unobtrusively, even attractively. Our artists and designers are more than up to the task, given a chance to collaborate. These microsystems are less they can be and are funded by users, small-scale investors, and individuals via microfinancing and crowdsourcing, precisely owing to their small scale and their modularity. This plug-and-play approach contrasts sharply with the multi-billion multi-billion-pound centralized sewage, solid waste, and energy systems, for example, not to mention 30 and 60 billion-pound estimates, respectively, in today's terms for Crossrail 2 and HS2. 15 years ago, I started to ask my students, why can't a building be more like a tree and create rather than consume energy, collect rather than consume water, recycle and reuse its own outflows instead of flowing miles to centralized processing plants that produce yet more waste and pollution and consume yet more energy and materials. We can expand this concept to ask, when will infrastructure networks be interwoven to more completely into buildings, to each other and the urban fabric to serve the city sustainably like interconnected roots, mycorrhiza, and fungi serve the forest? Developing modular, small-scale, and decentralized nodes of infrastructure that are interconnected to form fully integrated networks is less costly, more sustainable, and more equitable, and more feasible because they're more easily able to be retrofitted in the existing cities and regions. We already do this with the internet and smart devices. Let's translate that to other networks. Several colleagues and I just did that 10 years ago with a network that integrated transport, electric power, and the built environment when we founded the first National Center for Transportation Electricity Convergence based on electric vehicles. This industry university cooperative research center was funded by $8 million from the National Science Foundation, plus equivalent contributions from multiple industry sectors. We developed an integrated spatial analytical platform by collaborating with multiple universities, corporations, governments, and industry peak bodies to optimize the high-value synergies amongst the power grid, transport networks, electric vehicles, and the built environment by forging links among them. This approach has even traveled to Spain. Bless you. There we go. Retrofitting this overall approach presented this evening into existing and future networks will be a painstaking, time-consuming, expensive, and importantly, a custom-designed task that will take our best thinking. It's not rocket science. A predictable and solvable physical science since the time of Newton. It's much more complex and challenging than that, yet an essential task for our well-being and competitiveness. We can also apply this circular approach to funding. I'm convinced that life cycle funding is the single most important missing link in solving the infrastructure finance conundrum. But first, let's take a short stroll in the past to remind us of the role of finance in infrastructure and city building, always foundational. In its evolution to a world city, in London we see the pivotal confluence of finance capital with infrastructure. And just as Rome 2 millennia ago, all roads led to London, as well as rails and ships. And without discounting Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, and fellow industrial cities, it was London where the greatest confluence of finance and in transport made its mark in transforming London into the first global city, and not incidentally, knowledge capital without peer. London was not alone. New York and Chicago followed as the first in the New World to apply this tale of two capitals formula. The two capitals being finance and facilities, always married. Historian William Cronin's magisterial book, Nature's Metropolis, described how the marriage of these two capitals made Chicago and transformed much of the American continent besides. And today, as society demands new types and arrangements of infrastructure to correspond to new needs like mobility, speed, agility, big data, the cloud, virtual reality, and so on, is it not time to finally employ our intellectual capacity fully to truly innovative thinking for infrastructure capital? As one of the biggest, fastest growing, and most lucrative sectors of the economy, surely infrastructure merits our best thinking. And in the will to growth, which leads to the will to infrastructure, we find a logic not dissimilar to the will to power with its inevitable consequences, especially conflict. Take the London Plan and its cautionary section titled A Changing Climate. Yet the very next page sports a section heading ensuring the infrastructure to support growth. A key premise for Crossrail 2, for example, to support projected growth of 200,000 homes and 200,000 jobs. Likewise for HS2 and the Northern Strategy. Now, am I alone in my cognitive dissonance reading those two sections back to back? A conversation leading to serious action to unlock the opportunities hiding behind this conflict awaits. And despite the IPCC reports, the Stern Commission, climate accords, scientific research, and so on, the main drivers of climate change, population growth and rising per capita consumption, are far from abating, as all the data show. And any sober analysis, and there have been many, reveals that we cannot escape a fundamental rethink of growth and progress if we seek to remain on a habitable planet. Yes, we can maintain quality of life and well-being even as population grows if we do it right and right now. In a series of articles, I have demonstrated the scientific theories and the mathematical proofs that underpin the mounting empirical evidence that shows that as cities become larger and more complex, they can only continue to become less sustainable. This is due to the immutable laws of thermodynamics. That is, unless we model cities and infrastructures on evolutionary and ecological principles, we'll be stuck in business as usual. While we cannot buy our way out of this, mainly because spending and consuming have led us into this predicament, we can think our way out of it. Back to finance. Most funding for finance for infrastructure worldwide has historically been only for capital construction costs. Taxes, tolls, and user fees were presumed to take care of operations and maintenance. Some were dedicated, many were not. Most did not keep pace with inflation, much less demand. Expenditures beyond operations and maintenance that are part of a cradle-to-cradle life cycle fell outside of standard funding mechanisms. Funding capital costs only is now in question. And no matter the source, the amount needed and what it is needed for must be calculated in an entirely new way. Business as usual only digs the holes we have dug even deeper. Yet it's easy to grasp, I believe, why the private sector, particularly finance, has muscled its way onto infrastructure turf. The increasingly superior returns on finance capital compared with other types of capital, on top of multi-trillion-pound worldwide infrastructure spending, go a long way in explaining the ascendance of infrastructure and equity arenas. Infrastructure investments are returning the greatest yields. The old situation of government paying for it is gone. And what will replace it now and in the future that will be both sustainable and equitable in serving the public good? To make sure that the public interest remains served, value capture for infrastructure finance becomes paramount. And that's a tall order in debilitated government regimes. Private equity prefers government's hands-off infrastructure, especially now that bond and cash yields are historically low, nearly non-existent, and equities are increasingly risky. And this is paradoxical, as private equity and real estate development at the same time seeks certainty, which in large part is guaranteed by strong and stable government. Can society have it both ways? This debate is critical and must go on. I believe it can be best informed and brokered by impartial institutions such as universities and carried out dispassionately in independent fora and arenas. All sectors have their proper roles to play, yet one sector cannot abdicate responsibility for infrastructure, and another cannot usurp it due to a single motive. Balanced partnerships, multi-sector ones, in which multiple interests are served fairly, are the aim. And regardless of how financing is obtained, what it pays for and how those decisions are made are also of import. And by what I don't mean which systems or projects, like which airport will get a third runway or which type of energy will be funded. Existing mechanisms have those decisions more or less sorted, though we can always do with more evidence, more transparency, and civic input. Instead, we need to devise completely new decision criteria based on cradle-to-cradle life cycle equity and sustainability that apply to the financing as well as the planning and design of the systems. For example, most infrastructure funding in London is for transport and energy, along with flood control, and for good reasons. We think of big ticket items like HS1 and 2, Crossrail 1 and 2, airports, the Thames Barrier, and so on. Investments in spectacularly complex feats of engineering such as these are critical. Yet amidst the rush to fund big ticket mega projects intended to boost the economy, do we not mask the public interest characteristics of infrastructure rooted in its origins as commonweal and public trust? I ask not to throttle ambition or vision, nothing of the kind. We should seek balance, yet to attain balance is to alter the course of a fleet's worth of aircraft carriers, metaphorically. With this new vision, this new course to set sail upon, we can maintain, if not boost ambition, and do it more sustainably, less costly, more equitably. And we must be fully aware of the implications of this challenge. It could be called old habits die hard. Sunk capital dies harder. The fixed costs of sunk capital and the fixed facilities it builds determine urban form and function as it has for millennia. Those fixed forms, roads and rails, ports and parks, and so on, are the priceless assets of the public trust and civic works of art at their very best. Can we transform equally fixed and discipline-bound methods? Professional habits die hard too. So who would have thought Bruce Willis to be an infrastructure philosopher? Today, more than ever, rigid disciplinary thinking is called into question in the network society and the space of flows. What is the future of infrastructure when we recognize the primacy of processes in determining urban form? We live transactive lives on the go in transactive cities, presaged by urban theorist Richard Meyer's 1968 article, The Metropolis as a Transaction Maximizing System. Transactions, of course, enabled by infrastructure. Long ago, infrastructure and public or common lands were known as the public trust. Another historical term for the material public trust was commonwealth, wealth that was held in common by the people who were its owners through the trust they placed in their representatives. How different it is today. In recent decades, there has been a steady, incremental, drip-by-drip erosion of the public trust, meaning public lands and public works. This is but one consequence of neoliberalism. It's revealing to note that the terms in use today, public capital, asset, and investment, that have replaced what was called the public trust, the terms have changed over time so that private sector language dominates now. Another facet of the public trust is that it serves as a glue to hold very messy democratic processes together. This aspect of trust is embedded in the social and political capital needed that keeps people engaged constructively over the long periods of time that are needed to do infrastructure planning and financing. This glue consists of two interrelated ingredients, trust and transparency. Otherwise, no matter how carefully constructed the protest, how civil the proceedings, how carefully selected the stakeholders, any process could fall apart without public trust. Interpersonal trust is not sufficient. Civic trust needs to be rekindled. The erosion of this facet of the public trust has been most damaging to our collective responsibility to plan and finance infrastructure and to ensure its services and impacts are equitable. In these contentious yet pivotal times, highlighted today, especially for the UK, what is being done to advance London's leading position? As London and its ambitions grow, does its infrastructure pass muster? In a knowledge economy where high-quality talent is central to competitiveness, well-being, and the well-being and the environment are inexorably intertwined with the economy. Even historically, has not the natural environment, especially the River Thames, been the core of London's welfare and public image? Enhancing the natural attraction of London by clearing up the Thames will boost the appeal of the city, vital in the post-Brexit world. Given that many European cities have poured vast sums into revitalizing their public trust known as waterfront, London must follow suit, not just to keep pace, but to go further by truly transforming the Thames and the city's relationship to it. River capitals from Berlin and Budapest to Vienna and Prague are doing so. European cities are not alone. Waterfront improvements on a big scale have been the bread and butter for city competitiveness for 2 generations. Why is London lagging? For this, we need the perspective of history. And what better history is there than the river itself? For the Thames is liquid history, per John Eliot Burns. The River Thames has been called the heart and soul of London. While the Thames is far from a hidden flow, it would seem to have been at least partly obscured in the policy and investment apparatus, along with the public's imagination, for a good length of time. I exempt, of course, rats, rowers against Thames sewage, and mice, merchants investing in a clean estuary. Okay, that last acronym was fictive. But it was not always thus, as the following quotations attest. There's no river in the world to be compared for majesty and witchery of association to the Thames. Hume Nesbit. Oh, clear are England's waters all, her rivers, streams, and rills, flowing stilly through her valleys, lone and widening through her hills. But river, stream, or rivulet, through all her breadth, who names for beauty and for pleasantness with our own pleasant Thames? William Cox Bennett. Oh, could I flow like thee and make thy stream my great example, as it is my theme. Though deep yet clear, though gentle yet not dull, strong without rage, without overflowing full. John Denham. Thames, maiden Thames, glancing, shining, silver blue. Alexander Hume Butler. And my favorite, if afield from these poets, is Benjamin Disraeli's. The difference between a misfortune and a calamity is this. If Gladstone fell into the Thames, that would be a misfortune. But if someone dragged him out again, that would be a calamity. Yet, only a bit over 150 years ago, with the advent of Charles Dickens's less than poetic word pictures, did the literary and artistic iconography of the river change. And how did it change? Dickens cast the new image in Little Dorrit, quote, through the heart of the town, a deadly sewer ebbed and flowed in place of a fine, fresh river. In David Copperfield, Dickens calls the Thames, quote, polluted and derelict, the nightmarish wasteland. A century on, it was still thus in 1957 when the Natural History Museum declared the Thames biologically dead. Fortunately, the river has come quite far since, shedding the shadow of Cloacina, the Roman goddess of sewers, donning brighter hues instead. Yet we know it has a long way to go before becoming pure and clean again. Can we take this goal as a standard so that the poet's sonnets can recover the Thames as a theme so that artists don't need to use Photoshop? It's a matter of priority, and what greater priority can there be than the heart and soul of London, that is the River Thames? Most major cities in Europe, and many in the UK, like Bristol, have made major strides in recovering their waterfronts, now integrated into their cities. Some, like Barcelona, have made it their centerpiece. It's an entirely new city now. In spite of the gains here, we have a golden opportunity to reclaim its waters and waterfronts so that all can enjoy a better life. To further the gains include separating combined sewerage so that stormwater and sewage don't commingle, especially acute in the light of its being a tidal estuary. The Thames Tideway Tunnel is a step in this direction. These separated networks must be extended watershed-wide. In addition, daylighting or uncovering of streams and rivers that have been channeled underground and built over reveals another one of London's hidden flows that can be brought alive into a metropolis-wide green and blue network. These and other fixes will make our river the pride and joy of all who flock to its shores and waters. My vision for the River Thames is clear and pure water that is swimmable, fishable, and potable, that has green banks replete with parks and paths on both sides, pleasure boating, regattas, and a more robust ferry network, a true blue ribbon that spans the metropolis. The River Thames is a liquid capital that connects London to the world. This vision will take time to realize. the Thames Gateway Partnership, Thames 21, Thames Water, the GLA, the government, and others are tackling this head-on and gaining ground. Or is it water? The London Plan makes much of the river along the lines I advocate. More work awaits. Attaining it will require an Apollo-like focus to transform it so it once again the river animates a city that delights the senses, as evoked in the London Plan. And by Apollo-like focus, I mean the Apollo space program. Leave it to NASA engineers to turn a Greek god into a program. We can paraphrase Philippa Rowe of the West End Partnership and say that the upgrade of infrastructure makes the best case to take London into the future. Not just the Thames, but the other pride of London and now all of England's. No, not Fuller's. The Green Belt. Time does not permit analysis of this or any other green infrastructure. Clearly, green infrastructure of all kinds fits into the vision that I sketch. They are low-cost, high-value ways to enact parts of this vision. London has the opportunity once again to take the lead in green infrastructure as it did with the landmark Green Belt. As foci of the Green Infrastructure Task Force, they merit full support. Moreover, the principles underlying green infrastructure can serve as a model for all infrastructures. To conclude, we bring another aspect of the emergent circular economy into the realm of infrastructure, the sharing economy. Its distinction is trading on use value, not exchange value. Use value as an underlying principle places it properly in the realm of ecology instead of economy, notwithstanding their common root in Greek, oikos. The sharing economy is part of a greater sharing ecology we simply call society. We can craft multiple roles for new infrastructures in the sharing society. This new vision of smaller, modular, decentralized, and distributed networks suits the interpersonal nature of caring and sharing. This form of infrastructure, digitally enabled, helps bring out the best in us. What's more, this type of infrastructure goes a long way in gaining greater social equity and distributive justice. Let us not overlook that sharing is caring. We can also grasp the benefits to democracy that stem from developing the sharing society. This is because cooperation is its key precept. To advance these aims, in partnership with universities and other sectors across London, we plan to establish a forum and platform for sustainable infrastructure that goes beyond the customary research, analysis, and advice. A think and do tank based on design thinking that incubates, creates, and tests models, scenarios, and prototypes to accelerate the already robust foreign arenas undertaking similar work. And in closing, infrastructure is paramount to us all. New kinds of infrastructure for new ways of living that lead us into a bold new world. My hope that infrastructure is not seen merely as a physical substrate to the economy. It has ramifications for every realm of human life and can lift the human spirit. The Golden Gate Bridge does that for me every time. Infrastructure enables our cities to grow and prosper. They are the key to their sustainability and our well-being. As infrastructure makes cities possible, great infrastructure makes great cities possible. This applies to towns and villages as well as cities, indeed to the nation as a whole. Think of industrial Britain and you think railways, pre-industrial Britain and canals, global Britain and networks. Great infrastructure makes great places. Continuing to do so in the future, we will be proud to be citizens of somewhere special, made so by infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you for hugely inspiring and a lecture that's so full of knowledge, but so clearly communicated that a simple, humble architect like myself, which would normally be out of their depth, speaking of hearing such things, nevertheless, I kind of understood it enough to realise the true potential of the thinking through infrastructures, both in terms of the kind of broader scale of planning in reciprocity with with place thinking, place making, and between natural and built environments. And it opens up as many avenues of thinking as it does informs current thought. So thank you hugely for that lecture. We've got a few minutes for questions, and I'm sure many of you are far more qualified than I am to ask those insightful questions. Would you like to start the process? I mean, I could ask a sort of an architect's take on relationships between place and infrastructure, which I think are kind of key, but I'd like to pass the questions to the audience.
Have you found a difference in what I'll call new cities rather than the transformation of old cities? So if you think of the youngest cities on planet Earth, perhaps in China or India or Latin America, are they being developed recognizing the digital world, the battle between atoms and bytes, and the impact on smartness? And are you seeing that in the new cities?
Yes and no. What I mean by that is that, first, a general comment would be that my own comments could apply to any city, but it's a very important and a fair question. In today's world, who doesn't have a smartphone almost, or who's not connected digitally, the knowledge is out there. And thanks to the EIB, the European Investment Bank, and the World Bank, and many other regional banks, and just the economy, society in general, the knowledge, the practices, the materials, the information, it's all spread everywhere. So while there can be a distinction, it varies place to place, but there isn't necessarily a strong distinction because of the widespread availability of virtually everything nowadays. I think it's a matter of priority, will, and resources being applied, just like to anything else. It's a very general answer, but thank you for your question.
I was just interested, obviously, the ideas about the green belts in the UK are coming to the fore at the moment, and I was interested in knowing about your thoughts about the green belt around London, and whether we should be celebrating that or looking to cut it down and get rid of it, or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about 10,000 bulldozers and chainsaws should do it, right? Clear land for development. That slide, by the way, let me go back to it. That slide on the Greenbelt, those purple dots indicate, and I'm sorry, I forget the name of the association, a national association that helps protect rural areas. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it or members. They've indicated those are areas under threat because of current development proposals. Although, I found that the actual amount of acreage in the Greenbelt in London has remained virtually the same over the last number of decades, which is great. I studied the Greenbelt in planning school back in the day, and had a close association with Sir Peter Hall, and I learned a lot about London's planning and the Greenbelt through him. It's critically important, but I think green infrastructures of all types and integrating what you could call natural or ecological infrastructures into cities more and interweaving them with human design and built green infrastructures is you could tell from my lecture, it's a solid way to go. That's very feasible, a lot less costly than other infrastructures. I mean, there are a lot of practices around the world that are demonstrating these claims.
Hi, thanks for the talk, Michael. Great talk. I wanted your input on perhaps the politics of air and water meeting the politics of sustainable infrastructure in the city, because a city is a temporal space, of course expanding, but the river and the air are so far away from in terms of the politics of the city and what the city is temporally responding to. And I just wanted your comments on that.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I interpret it to mean the following, that you know, I mean, obviously we need air and water to live, and you were highlighting the spatial aspects and the temporal. In other words, the right here, right now. And I think that as people, the more people, this is my belief, and there's a lot of research that's underlying my own experiences, that the more people are connected to and the more closely they're connected to nature, whether it be trees in a park or a river that's really accessible, they can stick their toes in, et cetera, et cetera. And when the air is clean and the water is clean, not only are we delighted, it just makes, we're healthy, you know. The research is out there. And so I think that proximity to clean water and you know, air is all around us. It's absolutely essential. I'm not really sure if I'm fully interpreting or answering your question, but I think it's, you brought in the politics to it. And I think it's a matter of bringing politics into the equation is really critical, because not only is the politics finance link critical to infrastructure and to city development, but that the way our laws, and including our tax laws and our systems are designed, our financial and economic systems, you know, that book I had mentioned, Fossil Capital by Andres Malm, a Swedish scholar. I'm just quoting from something here. Fossil energy is publicly subsidized at 6 times the rate of renewables. And so that's bringing politics into clean air and clean water right there. So I think it's important that not only do we have closer connection to nature, not only for our well-being, but it generates a kind of attitude, a social, a societal attitude that enables us to support wanting and having clean air and clean water and all the other good things, a good green belt. And I think that political attitude and the institutions and mechanisms behind it are clearly in place when we want them to be in place. And fortunately, the progressive leadership right now at the London and the national levels are you know, making good efforts to gain cleaner air and cleaner water. Does that even come close to answering your question? Thank you.
Professor Newman, thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
Very interesting. You made passing reference to the problem of capturing value from infrastructure, and at the moment in London it's probably one of the biggest sort of discussions and trying to find ways to achieve that. And of course it's central to your last point, which is the politics of all of this. And it's very easy to identify the infrastructure we would like. How we pay for it is becoming more and more difficult, because, as you say, the politics requires that fundamentally the politician wants infrastructure to be cheap to the consumer, to the public, because they don't want to pay for it, basically. And therefore, but you can't actually, they can't afford to pay for what they would like. And so this whole issue of how do you capture the enhanced value that's created to society, whether it's by developers, whether it's by the consumer, how do you actually capture that is I think in many ways the biggest challenge we face in order to deliver, whether in America the trillions of dollars or here the billions of dollars of infrastructure that we would like to create. Have you seen anywhere where they've come close to finding a solution to this?
Well, you know, the legal and the urban planning community have been working on this for decades now, and there are examples around the world. They typically are contractual, meaning specific agreements designed for specific projects in specific places, and so the transaction costs are very high because the type of knowledge and the amount of time that it takes to construct one of those agreements with all the architects, engineers, the lawyers, the finance people, the legal, the political people, all that stuff. And so that's one way, and that can be built into the process through legislation, which is, of course, important. But I think there are simpler, more direct ways that apply fair and equitable, meaning proportionate, let's call it formulae, so that different things, for example, impact fees, I've had a lot of experience with in the United States. I don't know what they're called here. basically regulating or legislating for revenue. But it's an absolutely essential question because in the end, you know, you need money to build infrastructure no matter what it is. But I think that if we design the infrastructure more intelligently and we use a lot of the principles that I and many others are, you know, the way we're moving in society, then I think the systems themselves will be cheaper. You know, there's you know, what captures the headlines is the sexy big ticket stuff, right? And it's important stuff, but it's a matter of priority, you know. And I'm not the one, it's society and its representatives in government that determine the priorities. But, you know, when you spend $60 billion for a few hundred kilometers of a high-speed rail track, that's a lot of money that could go to other things. I'm not making a judgment call one way or another. I'm just highlighting an obvious societal choice. And so I think one thing we could do is to bring the cost down. And I think through good you know, intelligent systems, we can manage demand better. And I think we can build and integrate different types of networks, so I said, so that it's more circular, so the output of one becomes, just like in nature, only humans produce waste. So and we can use smart infrastructure design, therefore urban design, through circular thinking that can reduce all that, not just the waste, but the costs and the disposal costs. But getting back to the finance and the value capture, I think there's two general approaches. One is to have a legislative approach that's has a flexible formula that can apportion fairly. So it's known, a known playing field, so that a developer knows in advance what's required, very important. And the other is to enable, but to streamline contractual, meaning project-specific agreements that you know, you were mentioning and I was mentioning. And so, I mean, I actually have some experience in this, so I'm happy to contribute in whatever way. But it's the key question. It can be tackled and has been elsewhere, but so far, because it's a new thing, there's a learning curve with great transaction costs as well. But I think it's worth it in the long run.
Thank you. We need 64 million trees in the UK to restore the oxygen balance as we're reducing pollution using different technologies. And we can't do this 2 people or 4 people. We need to do that in mass collaboration with people. So I think the area that you've got with the purple dots, those people are more aware of what is happening in their own environment, and they can start tree planting. We have 500,000 volunteers of students and universities and everything who can do that. And I think now to get an agreement with the mayor on that this is a very critical priority, that we restore the oxygen levels in London and the surrounding areas, will be a fantastic project that we can lead the world in.
Great. So I take it you're with the Council for the Protection of Rural England, perhaps?
Me?
Yes.
No, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the financing of that into practice at the community level, rather than too much policy and nothing, and too much talk and nothing into practice.
Is there a question there? I understood the comment. Good comment. I was just wondering if there's a question there.
No, I think you should be part of the leadership with this, and we should go to the mayor and anyone else that's interested in here and is committed to the trees and the environment. And we should go to the mayor and get an agreement for a mass collaboration.
Thank you very much. We're all leaders.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that final comment and your questions. Those of you with burning comments, we will make Michael available in the reception on the ground floor. Michael, we're extremely proud to have you as part of the University of Westminster. Please join me to say thank you once again.